I'll try my best not to shout, but try and project. Guten Tag! Not bad for a Scotsman. My first time in Germany, first time in Berlin. It's good to be here. I'm, as Liam said, I'm Jamie MacDonald. I'm with MindGenius. And it's the first time that I've been asked to speak at those events. I believe my colleague was at the last event last year, and he told me, listen, there's mind mappers, real mind mappers, there's vendors, the competition, and then there's the unwashed, the uninitiated. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I let myself in for? But I have to say, just talking with everybody, even the competition, they're not a bad bunch. They're not a bad bunch at all. So it's good to be here, regardless of who we are, to share, not just to give, but to learn. And I've learned a lot. So my thanks to Liam for the invite. It's beyond what I expected. I was really anxious, really worried because of the vendor thing and the mind mapping thing. You know more about mind mapping than I'll ever know. But it's good. It's good. As you can see from I'm using MindGenius, the mapping. I decided not to get fancy. I didn't export to PowerPoint or use the presentation mode. I just decided, listen, it came from my head. I typed it all down, and now I'm just going to share it with you. So there's no fancy stuff going on here. And the title is Mind Mapping for Business. Are you serious? And I should have spoken to you first, because after we haven't met before, but there's actually a lot of commonality. So I hope it doesn't look as if, right, I listened to him, so I'm going to do him or beat him or be smarter than him. There's a very similar theme. And I hope I don't switch the rest of you off. But it's very interesting how we're talking in a business context rather than in a pure, did I want to mention the word horse? No, I'm not going to mention the word horse. Anyway, okay. So I was quite pleased. So I'm going to look at just really bridging the challenge that we face, whether we're users, whether we're software users, whether we're traditional paper mind mappers, whether we're in business, whether we're in education. There's what I call bridging the gap. There's a challenge for us all in terms of mind mapping software to, yeah, this has changed the focus a little bit, so I need to alter this a little bit. Can't even see my mouse. My laptop is, everything's disappeared where it was. Yeah, that should do it. Can I just ask a question? A couple of questions. If you could give me a show of hands. How many of you think mind mapping is mainstream? It's an everyday business. It's accepted. It's just like any other tool technique. It's right in there in business. Yeah? There's very few hands. Very few. In fact, there's hardly any. Interesting. I'm with you. I agree. Second question. How many of you would say that mind mapping software is seen as a serious benefit? Whether it's mainstream or not, is it a serious benefit? Is it like it's going to add value to my bottom line? Is it a tool or a technique that makes me more productive, makes me more efficient? Is it seen that way in business? Is it a serious business benefit? Is it discussed in the boardroom? Did it add value to the business? There's very few hands again. A couple of yeses and all the rest. That's fine. But what we find, I don't know if my competitor friends, shouldn't really use the word competitor, should I? Or fellow vendors.
It's very good.
I hate competition. I've never gone toe-to-toe with any other software vendor. I just
Special friends.
special vendor friends. Would you agree? It's not mainstream and it's not seen as adding business value. In the main, we're chipping away at it. Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So I just want to look at the challenges we face then. Okay. I think it's about what I said just there a few minutes ago. It's about bridging that gap, because time and time again I get challenged. I don't know if my colleagues find this, but by business people in particular. It's not so much in the education, because mind mapping is it's more alive in the education. But business people, whether or not they use mind mapping software, they say, well, it's not just, that's just a nice to have. That's a bit kind of geeky, and you know. There's no real benefit, you know, you can't, it's not serious. So, you know, we've got to bridge the gap between nice to have and being a value add. I think you mentioned it earlier on, this, you know, we all know what Excel is, we all know what Word is, we all know what PowerPoint is. Less of us know what Mind Manager is, or what, and no disrespect because I'm going to mention this all, or MindMeister, or XMind, or FreeMind, or MindGenius, or whatever. It's just the fact of life. So how can we get them all? How can we get us all up there? Can you hear me at the back? Do I need this?
Yes, please.
Oh, no.
All serious question, serious answer.
Yeah, I'm now finding it difficult to work out which hand's going to work the keyboard and my cheats. So, in our experience, I suppose we've been around for about 12 years.
It's off.
It's off.
Just keep on saying it.
No, nothing. Nothing? It's difficult to hear from this side. I would expect something to happen. On, off. Be gentle with me, I'm a mind mapper. Don't know about technology.
Just don't think I have the heart to tell Nick, who's obviously just gone down 4 flights of stairs to get the mic in. I don't think I've got the heart to tell him it wasn't working.
They put IKEA batteries in, which only last.
IKEA batteries.
IKEA batteries.
I think over the last few years, over the last 12 years or so that we've been involved in creating mind mapping software, there have been hundreds of thousands of customers that have invested in the software, mind mapping software, for a number of reasons. The top one there, you've got the exponents of the original mind mapping. The technique as an aid principally for this capturing, visualizing all their ideas, their knowledge and creativity, just getting it out there to look at it, visualize it, and gain understanding of it, whether it's for learning, whether it's just for retention and recall in an education environment or in a business environment. But they are entrenched, as my colleague earlier said, in the original mind mapping. And if it wasn't for that original mind mapping, a lot of us wouldn't be in this existence. So I still, although my line is now in mind mapping software, I still have a feeling for the paper-based stuff, and I still do it day to day. We had Tony Buzan in the early days working with us on MindGenius. He closed the door on us and said, you'll never get mind mapping software to replicate through mind mapping. And we said, okay, bye. We'll show you. He was right. It's a struggle. I don't know if there are anyone else who can admit to this, but it's a huge struggle. So we have to accept that there's traditional paper-based mind mapping with all its rules and all the rest of it, user guidance, and what we're trying to do in more of a kind of business context. Then there's the second one, the users in education. These are educators, teachers, students, but there's some in the room looking for software that will help them replicate just what we've talked about, as clear as possible. And we all do it to varying degrees of success. Again, there's still a gap. Don't know if we'll ever close it, there's still a gap. But it helps. It's just another, I suppose it's horses for courses.
Very good, very good.
I was listening. And so it is horses for courses. You know, one methodology, one technique, one piece of software against another piece of software. It's a matter of preference. But again, back to basics. The educators are looking for something that will consolidate their knowledge of mind mapping, bring it into the kind of 21st century, if you like, and look at it as a technique to teach, to impart, to share, to communicate, but also, from the other point of view, to learn, to come in and retain things and make things memorable. And we can all relate to how that helps. And then we've got the third person, the business person. The business person with all that stress, all that urgency, all that requirement to do things on time, on spec, to the highest standard, plus VAT. Constant pressure. We're in a whole wide area of disciplines, and we're all there to some extent. I think it was mentioned earlier, just as well you were on first, mate, you can claim it. I've just nicked it from you, no I haven't. A more efficient way of working, more efficient ways to capture that knowledge, that creativity, that experience that resides in there, to capture it and visualize it and make sense of it. But then to move to action, to move to a decision, to have focus and clarity all the way through. So it's going from ideas to action, but quicker, more decisively, and more productively. We've heard this before, we've been on the management courses, so we've heard it all before. But that's the reality that faces the business person. And that includes, I've just made a mention second from the bottom there of senior managers. There are a lot of our user bases within businesses that tend to be at a senior level. They're directors, senior managers, and some business owners. They have specific requirements where it's kind of high level. Don't give me the detail, I want to strategize, I want to look at things at a high level. But it's still about capture it, visualize it. But then they need some sort of action planning, don't they? They need some sort of, right, now that we've talked about what are we going to do, when are we going to do it, who's going to do it, by when, all that stuff. So all this I'm talking about filters all the way through business, education. And then I've made mention of project managers. This is something that's emerged over the last few years, that in project work, there's this creative front end that's required. People traditionally dive into schedule mode. Somebody mentioned earlier on this linear, static way, which in the cooking analogy, the books are linear, static, complicated. Whereas sometimes they just need to take a step back and use mapping to visualize it, to look at the structure and the linkages and the whole kind of approach, if you like. So the project manager is looking again at that intuitive visual way to plan, but also to be able to go quickly to schedule and then to monitor and control, make sure that we do everything and do it on time. Now all this you're thinking, well, I've heard this before, this is all old hat. But I'm trying to now create a kind of reason to believe that mind mapping is absolutely aligned with the so-called cut and thrust and urgency of business.
I think we've lost your screen, Joe.
What's my screen? It's just sleep mode on the old Dell. Okay. So I think there's this disconnect between the basic concept and the way of working. Again, the feedback from the customers tell us that mind mapping has different meanings. In this room, we've got different meanings for it. There's preconceptions and dare I say, misconceptions. Whilst mind mapping is recognised in the main as a technique or a methodology to aid thinking and understanding, and I know there's more to it than that, but that's the kind of basic tenet on it. There's also a disconnect between mind mapping in that basic context and as what I call a way of working. I always have this constant battle with people to say, look, if you don't like mind mapping, or if you've got a misconception about mind mapping, what about the way you currently work? How do you currently visualize your project plan? How do you currently make sense of that literature you're trying to read, that bit of research you're doing, your marketing plan, your strategy? How do you chunk it? How do you put it into chewable bits that you can just take bit by bit and understand it, or prioritize it, or whatever you want to do? And I think that's a big disconnect. But fortunately, as we heard earlier, mind mapping has moved on. I think it's improving. There's a lack of appreciation in the business world that mind mapping has moved on, and admirably, with all the technology that's around, it's coping, I think, very well with this technology savvy and, dare I say, technology dependent world. I think as well, the fight to win the hearts and minds, which I think everybody, if I took anything away from today, is that although we might be vendors or traditional mind mappers or whatever it is we are, educators and so on, we've all got a responsibility to win hearts and minds. We've all got a responsibility to make sure that whatever you see mind mapping as, or your preferred way of working is, that you try and promote that in the best, particularly in this business area, which seems to be lagging behind so much the education sector. And the fight to win hearts and minds is to try, in my view, try and align it with the urgency that the business person has. This play on the productivity angle. It's all about being more efficient and more productive. So if we can align that with productivity and efficiency, and a lot of the messages coming out now from vendors and such like indicates that. We can all add more technical wizardry. We can all add buttons and features and all the rest of it. But what we hope you see is that, and I challenge business people to this day in, day out, I ask them the following questions. In terms of meetings, brainstorming sessions, task management, planning, project management, authoring documentations and reports, all the key things that we do day in, day out, I ask them basic questions. And I would urge you to do the same thing if you're trying to win over the argument, regardless of the product you use or the methodology you use, is, does lack of focus and clarity in any of these aspects get in the way of your performance and your efficiency? Just be honest. Put mind mapping to one side. Just tell me, look me in the eye and tell me, does focus and clarity, do you lack focus and clarity in any of these aspects? And it's about, I don't have to teach my granny to suck eggs in Scotland, but you've been meetings. You need to plan the methodology, even just setting the agenda, setting the objective for the meeting, setting your desired outcomes, inviting the right people, having the right facilitation methodologies. Get all that mapped. You'll be absolutely in the zone. The outcomes of the meetings, and so on and so forth. I don't have to go through the processes. The processes within each of these key aspects we can all relate to, because we have to deliver these day in, day out to the best standard possible. It was mentioned earlier. So that's the question. Be honest. Do you lack focus and clarity on the input, the process, and the outcome of all of these things? The answer is invariably yes. Then you're starting to talk. Then you can look at mind mapping as a methodology to underpin all these things. So the other thing I've done, by the way, is that because of the time and everything else, while the earlier speaker, Lucas, was speaking, I cut down, I just chopped a few of the branches. So I kind of lost my way. You probably noticed a few seconds ago, because in the interest of time, I've just cut a lot of it out. So this one, just noticed I left in. It's that question of going through meetings, brainstorming, project planning, all that sort of thing, and saying, do they apply to you? Be honest. Is there room for improvement? Be honest with me. Would you be better focused, more clarity on these? And the answer is usually yes. And then finally, there are others in your organisation that can feel the same way. Oh yes. Now I'm beginning to sound like a salesman here. I've never sold a piece of software in my life. But that to me is the fundamental question, is that there's a clear alignment between everything we do in business and a method to be more effective and efficient in it. So why do we still go to Word and Excel and Project and all these linear static things when there's a creative front end needing to be done? Vendors are passionate about it, obviously, and we're still to hear another one. We're all aligned in terms of we like to listen to our customer and we have to listen to our customers, but let's go back to basics. Focus and clarity, productivity and efficiency in everything. So that's what I was talking about there in terms of, having that argument with the business person and saying, yes, you'll have a creating and engaging visual front end to your plans, your projects, your everything else. Yes, there'll be better prioritization, decision making through mapping it out and making sure you've got clarity on it. Yes, we have an export the same as everybody else to Word and PowerPoint project and Outlook synchronization. So you've got quick and effortless outputs. So the argument is less on technology. You have your own choices to make in terms of that, but there's no doubt about the output, increased focus and increased productivity. So, a little challenge for you. There can't be very many people in businesses out there who disagree with some of what I've said, if they're honest. So, what do? People always give you a reason. The left brain thinkers, the right brain thinkers, they don't use this methodology. I've heard them all before. Mind mapping's just, something that was done 20 years ago, 40 years ago. If you align it to these things, I think we'll all get on, we'll all get traction, we'll all get adoption. Just one more question. A show of hands, please, if you don't mind. Is mind mapping software geared for all this? If you can just accept what I've said in terms of productivity and efficiency in your meetings, your project planning, your lesson plans, your teaching, is mind mapping software a proposition? Is it valid? Is it relevant? Show of hands for those who think it's yes. Thank goodness for that. Okay. And how many feel that mind mapping software for business is therefore a serious proposition alongside Word and Excel and Project? Some of the vendors are being put their hands up. Yeah, he wasn't listening, so I'm only kidding. So, challenge then for us. The users out there, preach, keep preaching, okay? Don't do what I do and try and sell a piece of software. Just preach the good word. Preach it relevant to the people's requirements, and we will get traction. People will see the benefits. Those around you, those beside you, those above you, keep going, keep plugging it as a methodology, whether you want to deal with it at a real level, and software level, huge validity for both. As vendors, I'm sure we will all keep continuing to beat out each other up. We'll all continue to keep listening to our customers, keep improving what we do so that we align ourselves not with our whiz-bang wall of wizardry, but with your everyday business processes. And together, we won't lose sight of the real business benefits. That's crucial for us. And as the non-user, the unwashed, if there's anybody in the room that's uninitiated, just remember this presentation and those that went before you and try it. This is a serious proposition. And if you were ever in doubt, to go back to the title of my presentation, Mind Mapping for Business, you're dead right, I'm serious. Thank you, Sean.